there's a misconception that Libra was what prompted the Chinese government to take this step. That's definitely a misconception that might have affected the timing maybe a little bit, but really at most. This has been in the works for a long time right now. And it's viewed as tremendously important for the Chinese government's current 5-year plan.
Welcome to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you are a developer, an entrepreneur, crypto enthusiast, or just trying to learn more about how distributed ledger technology and Hedera Hashgraph will impact your industry, then you'll love the episodes that we have coming up. Bookmark us, add us to your podcast app, and stay tuned.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Gossip About Gossip. I'm your host today, Cooper Kunz, and I'm lucky to be joined by Matthew Graham from Sino Global Capital. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be on the pod today.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you. Just to kick us off, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure thing. For many years, we've represented international technology companies here in mainland China for strategic partnership and investment. That's with our investment banking arm, Sino Global Capital. For about 8 years, we've done that. And so we have a fully bilingual team with skills in both finance and tech based in Beijing, but distributed. In fact, we have people in Beijing, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Kunming. For a long time now, a bespoke service for international tech companies that have unique needs in the China market. And the concept then was that very naturally and organically, we would start to develop sector competencies. And that happened when we fell in love with blockchain. So we still service legacy companies such as Axio is a longtime client that went from zero to multi-billion USD valuation. And that's a European nanomaterials company that we represent in China. So we still service these legacy companies, but in terms of new clients, we are all in on blockchain. And in fact, we launched a blockchain-specific platform, which is called Liquid Value. And that includes an investment arm for VC-style investments, as well as we do provide what colloquially you could think of as a crypto hedge fund. So we do provide managed crypto assets service as well.
That's awesome. So what made that decision to jump from, traditional companies into the blockchain industry? Why are you so excited about blockchain in China?
Sure. Well, we always represented cool companies that were doing really innovative things. But really, the reason that we were attracted to blockchain is the same reason that I was attracted to the Chinese market, which is that we wanted to be at the engine of growth. We wanted to be at the center of dynamic change. It's a similar impetus in terms of answering the question, why are we in China? Why did I build my business in China? Really, the answer is the same as why did we choose to focus on blockchain? It's the same impetus, wanting to be at the center of change.
That's awesome. Well, it's definitely the cutting edge of technology out there. How have you seen China's blockchain industry change in the past few years? When did you start investing or working in the blockchain industry?
We started investing in 2014. I've personally been following it since 2010, but we started investing in 2014, and we have been full-time in blockchain since 2017.
And since 2017, could you comment on how much maybe things have changed? The space is quite different now than it was then, riding out the market hype,
which is good.
among other things.
Yeah. Sure. So I think most of the changes have been healthy. At that time, we were 3 years in terms of our investments in blockchain. But at that time, it was too crazy. There were too many doing things that didn't make sense. And it was a very unhealthy market in 2017, as I'm sure many people will agree. And it's much healthier to shake out the people that are not appropriate for the space for any variety of reasons, and to have people that are looking to do more serious things for the long term in a healthy, sustainable way. You don't want 1999 pets.com, you want Amazon, right? You want people that are doing long-term cool stuff as opposed to crap.
Yeah, that's a great analogy of, people slapping the .com on a website similarly to slapping blockchain on a project.
It's the same thing, right? Yeah, because I mean, the first half of my career was on Wall Street, and so I saw that, right? So I saw, all of a sudden everything's a .com, and it's just like, well, why don't we put dog food on the, and make it .com, and it just doesn't make any sense, right? Because there's not going to be an internet vertical for every little tiny thing. We see that again, right? Where we have Long Island iced tea, right? Why not have Long Island iced tea something blockchain? It's the same thing. And it's not healthy, and so it's been super cool to see the professionals in the space move past that moment in time and not be fazed by it, not caring too much about people that were just there to join a party for a minute. Not, you got to just let those people go and keep on doing the work, basically. And so it's super healthy that's happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hopefully we never see the day that people are trying to put dog food on the blockchain, but we will see what happens there.
I bet if we Google that, we'll find it, one or two. It probably is somewhere, right? I remember there was in 2017, there were a couple fitness blockchain projects. Like you could do your bike, right? Do your spinning, and then you could like earn tokens as you spin. I don't know what to say. It's good that we're not doing that right now.
There are quite a lot of projects that I could share similar sentiments about.
Yeah.
Is there anything notably, crazy or surprising that you have seen out there that you would like to share? I'm sure that you have some awesome stories.
I do. We might have to save all the two problems. First of all, the really good ones, you got to save for a beer, to be candid, right? But so I can't really do it on a podcast. But the other thing too is you got to keep in mind that I'm combining China and crypto, and it's multiplicative. I have the damnedest stories you'll ever hear in your life. I really do. I guarantee you, I could tell you 10 stories, and they're just all will blow your mind. But I find that the problem is that the true stories that are so fantastic are so over the top. They're almost not credible. Even though they're real, they don't sound credible. So it's very difficult to tell friends back home some of the stories. But we can do that over a beer sometime.
I could definitely imagine. And, anytime that I find myself in the Beijing or China area, I very much look forward to having that beer with you. So someone who's, so familiar and intimate with the Chinese blockchain market, could you maybe compare that to the United States is, maybe starting from a regulatory environment and moving into, anything else that you'd like to touch on there?
These comparisons get tricky because so much of it is about nuance. What we've observed is that the nuance doesn't get communicated internationally at all. And that goes both ways. That goes for international in China, and that goes for China internationally. And that's why we end up having narratives like, oh, well, isn't Bitcoin illegal in China? Well, no, it's not. It's a form of property. And you just get all these crazy narratives. I would frame it this way. In the United States, you have a very black and white, rules-oriented culture. And what I mean by that specifically is you have 45% of things you can do, and you have 45% of things you can't do. And then you have maybe 10% gray area. In China, for many reasons, which are probably outside the scope of this discussion, but in China, for many reasons, it's more like 10% you can do, 10% you can't do, and then 80% is gray area. So it's really very difficult to get used to, but you really have to start from that standpoint. That's the first thing that's super important to keep in mind. And then the second thing is that there are two red lines for China that apply to blockchain, crypto, everything A to Z. The first red line is anything involving currency controls. So as we know, the renminbi is not freely traded. There's an overseas renminbi, in fact, and there's a domestic renminbi. There's a very strict regime of currency controls. And so anything that starts to get into moving money around in such a way that it could touch that currency control regime, that's a super red line, and you definitely can't get anywhere near that. And then the second thing is large groups of retail investors. Basically, what that red line involves is there's a huge premium on social stability. So if you start talking about collecting money from a lot of little investors, a little here, a little there. This is like a super bad idea. And the government is definitely not going to be happy about that. And that's not something you want, because what they fear is that all of a sudden something could mushroom and you have 10,000 unhappy investors, and now they are meeting in some specific place and protesting or something like that. So that's the second red line. And you can't get anywhere near either of those two red lines. Putting those two things aside, there's huge gray area. And that's something that's really important to try to wrap your mind around, even though as Westerners, we don't really have that, right? So it's very difficult for us to do, but it's very important. So the fact is that you can't have Bitcoin, you can't have ETH, you can be doing all these things. You just got to stay away from those red lines, right? We know B is huge. We know, okay, yes, they now have a relationship with the Chinese government, which has gotten closer over time. So there is increasingly an element of acceptance for crypto if you play by a series of implicit rules and you avoid those red lines. That's a lot different than like the SEC, where like, don't do this and you can do that, and you got to do all these applications or all these compliance or this, that, or the other. This is like a very different style.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really insightful. I work with a lot of early projects, whether they're building on Hedera or not. And, I was there while Hedera was raising money as well. And I know that regulatory environment is very much top of mind for anyone trying to do innovative work in this space. Based off the fact that you're focused on China, do you think that your investment strategy is pretty different compared to those with a more global perspective, or, just kind of a consistency where everyone's concerned about regulatory environments?
Well, that's two questions. I think the first question is, it depends what type of investment we're talking about, because we do VC style investments, but we also do crypto hedge funds. Colloquially, we can call it that, managed crypto assets, right? So for VC style investments, our core competency is our relationships and knowledge and insight into the mainland China crypto and blockchain market. So we are always looking for projects that have not fully integrated themselves with the largest crypto community on the planet, and where we can help them better do that. So it's very strategic. And then in terms of crypto hedge fund, I would say that I shouldn't say style, but our implementation, look, we have a different, we're able to be trading on not just things that happen in the United States, but also things that happen in Shanghai. And we're able to do both in a very effective manner. So I think being able to integrate those two things into one thesis, whether it be a global thesis or whether it be in a more immediate action-driven thesis, such as when the DCEP announcement first came out about a year ago, does that really mean green light for China crypto? Every other person's going to start buying Bitcoin. And of course, we knew that was definitely not the case. So that's a unique insight, that just a very basic example of a unique insight and perspective. So it ends up being strategic for VC and more holistic in terms of international plus China, and being able to combine things together and have different perspectives.
That is super insightful. I think, in crypto, you really have to be able to know and see through the hype and actually know how markets are going to react, more so than almost anything else out there. So super insightful. And I don't think you could just manage that based off of actions in China. That's very much a global market. So shifting the conversation a little bit here, this is actually one of the main reasons that I was so excited to have you on the podcast. I saw that China started teasing out early versions of their central bank digital currency efforts. So I think that this is actually called digital currency / electronic payments over there.
I just call it DCEP. A lot of people say DCEP. I just call it DCEP. Maybe I'm trying to make that fashionable. Probably won't work, but I'm going with DCEP because I don't want to say DC/EP, every 5 minutes. DCEP.
DCEP. Okay. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
So could you maybe
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's gonna catch on or not. Maybe it'll be DC-EP. I don't know.
We'll see what happens. Maybe we'll have you back on the
Okay.
podcast
Yeah,
in
yeah.
a year
Okay.
and see what the consensus is. But could you talk a bit about, what they actually kind of teased out there?
Sure thing. This was most likely, I think it's best characterized as a leak, is what it was. And so basically, DCEP is legal tender, right? And it comes from the People's Bank of China. Just like if you had the Fed come up with a digital currency that's legal tender in the USD would be the analogy, right? But just like in the United States, there's this concept narrow banking that people talk about from time to time, and it always gets shot down because you would never want people to actually have accounts at the Federal Reserve. It doesn't make any sense. Why would the Federal Reserve want retail customers? So it's the same thing here in China. People's Bank of China obviously is not going to want, a billion plus retail customers having accounts. The point that I'm making is that there's an intermediary layer, and that consists of tech and finance companies. So that consists of your big banks, that consists of Alibaba because they have Alipay, that also Tencent because they have WeChat Pay, et cetera, right? There's that intermediary layer. So what we saw was a leak of one of these intermediary players is what happened a few days ago. And specifically was ABC, the Agricultural Bank of China. So it's important to understand that these types of government initiatives in China the information is extremely closely controlled. And so there's a lot that we still don't know. And in fact, there will be, eventually we can expect that there will be an Apple-style unveiling. Instead of a new iPhone, it will be DCEP. And instead of being a sexy presentation by Steve Jobs or now Tim Cook, it will be drier because it's a government bureaucrat presentation, right? But there's a lot that we still don't know. So going back to, we have all these intermediaries, and we can presume that each of them are doing one or probably more tests, either completely internally or with a small testing group. And this specific ABC, this specific bank, ABC, we have an app that was leaked. In fact, I have it on my phone right now. And so we have a UI, and we're able to see that it kind of looks like Alipay or WeChat Pay. And the app is being trialed with select groups of people. You could think of it as a focus group. We don't know if it's 10 people or if it's 2,000 or whatever, but it's being in 4 different cities: Shenzhen, Suzhou, those 3, and then I think the 4th was Chengdu. I would have to confirm the 4th. So I have this on my phone. I cannot get in there and play around, and neither can anyone else unless you're in that focus group, because there's a Baimingdang, which means that there's a whitelist. But what it looks like is very similar. This particular UI, which may or may not resemble the final thing, but this particular UI looks kind of like Alipay and WeChat Pay that I use every day. And so those could be possibly the equivalent of Square or Apple Pay, only for China, but with the big difference being that in China they are ubiquitous. I don't know offhand the market share for Apple Pay. You probably would better than I do, but it's not 50%, right? Whereas these 2 products, Alipay and WeChat Pay, really are almost ubiquitous in China. In fact, I have not carried a wallet literally in almost 2 years, because I do 99.9% of my non-crypto transactions using my phone and an account at one of those 2 applications, which is then linked on the back end to my bank. So hopefully this gives you some context. A couple key takeaways is that it looks kind of like a Chinese version of Apple Pay, except it comes from the government, but you don't get it directly from the government. You get it through a financial or technology intermediary.
That's super, super insightful. I think that is, much quicker than I expected to see any type of prototypes, or as you call them, leaks. How did this first?
Well, yeah, it wasn't. They didn't say we're gonna. Yeah, they didn't say we're gonna show you a prototype. It was. It was not intentional. It was information that was. My best understanding is that this was information that was not supposed to be communicated. So I would characterize it as a leak.
Okay.
And that's actually super rare in China, but that's my best understanding. So, the next thing is, well, wow, that's really fast. And it is, but also they have been researching, the Chinese government has been researching this for 4 or 5 years now. So this has actually been in the works for some time. If there's a misconception that Libra was what prompted the Chinese government to take this step, that's definitely a misconception that might have affected the timing maybe a little bit, but really at most. This has been in the works for a long time right now. And it's viewed as tremendously important for the Chinese government's current 5-year plan, and for geopolitical reasons, and for economic competitiveness reasons, and for many reasons.
Awesome. So what do you think is ultimately really the point or the goals behind DCEP?
So this is a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. And it's extremely difficult for people in crypto to understand DCEP, what the point is. And that's for good reason, because almost none of it actually has to do with crypto. It makes sense. It's confusing. So people in our crypto friends, in our crypto circle, they think, well, it's not Bitcoin. It's not any kind of crypto, actually. It's a digital currency, but it's not crypto. And it's not even blockchain behind the scenes. We know that, right? Because how could it be? The TPS would not be sufficient, transaction processing speed, to support hundreds of millions of users. There's no way it could be real, so to speak, blockchain technology on the back end. So then from a crypto perspective, it's hella confusing. What even is this, and what's the point? I would frame it as having 3 points, 3 purposes, and none of them really have anything to do with crypto. The first purpose is related to USD dollar hegemony. If you look at, so it's about economic competitiveness and geopolitical strategy, and if you look at international transactions, it's all about USD, right? And it's also very archaic. Settlement takes 2, 3, 4 days. It's too expensive. The whole thing's a pain in the ass, and it should be obsolete, but it's not. It's like having a conversation where you go into a shop and you say, "Oh, we got to look under the hood, and we got to fix some things," and then you have that horrific moment when you realize the code is in COBOL, and you got to go find like a 80-year-old COBOL engineer to help you out. So it's archaic. It should be obsolete, but it's not. So from the China government perspective, that's an opportunity. And it's very difficult to try to attack USD hegemony head on. And a lot of that relates to currency controls. Again, the renminbi, there's onshore, there's offshore. It's not freely floating. It's a controlled system, right? That makes it difficult to create an alternative to USD hegemony. From the China perspective, how then, keeping in mind that this plumbing is so archaic, how then could you try to chip away step by step at USD hegemony? And certainly one way that you could try to do that is through providing a next generation technology that makes all this obsolete plumbing pale by comparison. And then you could step by step encourage neighboring countries that are more economically intertwined with China. You could encourage them to transact in DCEP instead of using this, in layman's terms, this analog USD technology. I mean, we know everything's digital in one sense or another, almost everything, right? It's fundamentally different levels of technological sophistication that we're talking. So that's the first thing, USD hegemony, that's a motivation. Then the second thing is that every country, including China, including the United States, every country has a balance of state and private enterprises, and that balance, it ebbs and flows. It changes over time. In recent decades, the United States has been privatizing one aspect of government after another, right? So that's an ebb and flow. For example, even now, literally now, there are conversations about should we privatize the post office, right? So there's an ebb and flow. And if you look in China in the last 10 years, that ebb and flow has been a flow towards increasing power with the state-owned enterprises and such, in lieu of private enterprises. That's a fairly non-controversial, that's just a factual statement. Now you look at payments, right? Payments are fundamentally sensitive. That's why many people, including myself, threw a fit when Facebook talked about becoming involved in a fintech consortium and getting involved in money sensitive. Keeping that in mind, again, Apple Pay is a cool technology, but it's not like half of the United States is using Apple Pay every, 3-4 times a day. That's not what it is, right? And again, here in China, we have an electronic payments duopoly, Alibaba's Alipay and Tencent WeChat Pay. And they are, I use them myself. Let's see, how many transactions have I done today? I have done probably just 2 transactions today, but I probably average 5 or 6 a day, whether it be for my coffee or for getting a cab or whatever. I would say 99.9% of my non-crypto transactions are using either Alipay or Tencent's WeChat Pay. So that's an enormous power base for a duopoly to have. Now you have DCEP, and fundamentally, you can argue, is it directly competing or not? But fundamentally, it's a competitor to this fintech duopoly. That's a transfer of power back to the state, and it's consistent with a trend of the past 10 years. So I would say that's definitely objective number 2. And so returning to Libra, when I'm explaining Libra to Chinese friends, one aspect that I always highlight in terms of talking about the target market, I say, well, don't look at a map of Facebook's customers. Instead, get a map of the customers for WhatsApp, owned by Facebook, right? And you'll see that there's a heavy focus on Africa and South America, and then there's some Europe and a little Asia, and it's not like United States front and center in the way that Facebook is, right? And so WhatsApp is really a much better way to understand the target market for Libra. Related to that is that there's a huge element, as we know, about financial inclusion and unbanked or underbanked. That's a huge part of the Libra mission, right? Returning to DCEP and the third objective, we know that China in many ways is hyper digital, but that's not necessarily the full story. That's about first-tier cities and second-tier cities, and to some extent, third and I suppose even fourth-tier cities. That's a China way of ranking city size, right? So Philadelphia would be a second-tier city. Sorry, Philadelphia. And then New York, San Francisco, they would be first-tier cities, right? Hyper-digital, but China has 1.4 billion people. There are still at least a couple 100 million that are not really part of that digital nation in any real sense. So DCEP is a move to address that and to provide a measure of inclusion. Our current understanding of the ultimate vision is that you will not need a bank account to be able to transact for DCEP. There will be a means to be able to participate without that. And then additionally, you actually can transact offline, which is something kind of cool, right? So using NFC near field communication technology, which is a standard feature of almost all new cell phones, we can, if we're in a rural area and the 4G spotty, or soon the 5G, the Wi-Fi, this, that, or the other, we can bump phones and we can transact using DCEP. And then the technical implementation is still under wraps, but presumably after one or both of us is back online, then the transaction is settled at that time. But the point is that there's a huge aspect of financial inclusion that is part of the DCEP vision. That's the third thing. And then actually I should add, it's a little bit of an exaggeration to say, well, it's not crypto at all, because I would add the fourth thing is that our latest understanding is that there will be aspects related to the programmable money narrative, such as being able to execute scripts and things like that. This part is still probably too much under wraps to get into the details in an intelligent way without risking saying something that ultimately will not be true. It's still very much under wraps, but it does seem clear that there will be script execution capability, programmable money that will be part of the narrative as well. For examples of top line objectives for the DCEP vision, and only one of those is really related to crypto. So it's very understandable, actually, that it's confusing for crypto people in terms of wrapping their minds around what the hell is DCEP and what's the point?
That is incredibly insightful. I see a lot of different topics or conversations we could go from here. And I have a lot of people who ask me about central bank digital currency efforts, whether they're stateside or abroad. So many interesting things that'll be coming in the next couple of months and years in that space.
We should tell the viewers. The funny thing is, with Zoom, using Zoom in China, as with many conferencing technologies, you have to use a VPN now. And a VPN frequently will cut out and you have to reconnect, things like that. A whole monologue on the purposes of DCEP, I just delivered that thing twice in a row. So hold on, let me catch my breath here. Anyway, I just wanted to let you all know that I just did that whole monologue twice. Okay, let's move on.
I haven't told him yet, but I actually haven't been recording this whole time, and I'm just messing with him.
No.
I was kidding. Yes, just incredible insights there. I actually would recommend, if anyone wants to see the photos of the application that you have on your phone, I believe they're posted on your Twitter, if you want to plug that really quick.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So Matty Sino, M-A-T-T-Y, Sino is the name of my company, Sino Global Capital. And Matty is what only people who have known me since I was a kid are allowed to call me. And so MATTYSINO on Twitter. Just please keep in mind that, again, this is because there's that whole layer, intermediary layer between the People's Bank of China and the end users. And so this is one example of what ultimately will be many user-facing implementations of DCEP. And even this one example, there could be many tests of ongoing even at the Agricultural Bank of China. This is kind of like one slice of what possibly one implementation of DCEP could look like. So it's kind of important to have that context and not to think, oh, this is what it looks like, because that's not true.
Yeah, that actually is a great segue into the next point that I would love to hear your thoughts on. So you mentioned like the transfer of power from enterprises back to kind of the government, as well as this layer of kind of intermediaries who are all, as you think, working on different implementations of this DCEP. Could you speak a little bit towards the types of enterprise partnerships that you're seeing that are making this happen, or more generally in the Chinese blockchain industry?
The short answer is that these are a wide variety of very large finance and tech companies, with examples including Alibaba and Tencent and the big banks. But really, this is a wide variety of companies, but this is not like small companies. Believe me, I have a China, we have a China entity, and we have multiple entities. I have Hong Kong, China. So anyway, I have a China entity. Believe me, I'd love to use that entity to partner with DCEP, but it's not going to happen, right? Doesn't work that way. So these are enormous companies, for the most part, that are working in partnership with PBOC to be that second tier between PBOC and the ultimate DCEP customers. But they're not like your friend's, engineering company or whatever. These are big companies.
That's awesome. Obviously Hedera is pretty well accustomed to the large enterprise consortiums and council and our ownership bodies as well. So it's interesting to hear the parallels between what it really takes to kind of bootstrap some of these networks and systems and build out all the required infrastructure, not just the core technology, but also, the downstream distribution and all the interesting things that it takes to build new currencies. Few more questions while I have you here. And, I really, really appreciate your time. What advice would you have for companies trying to break into the Chinese markets or just generally raise money?
Sure. So this is a common question, and I would phrase it, I would say that the two most important things are that you absolutely have to have a partner on the ground. Otherwise, you really have a slim chance of success. It's not like popping over to do a deal in Germany. This is a extremely different business culture, and it's very relationship dependent, and you can't do it yourself. That's the first thing. The second thing then, I think, is that you need to stay super humble. If you get overconfident in the Chinese market, then that's the second thing where you really are headed for a disaster almost every time. You got to accept that there's always going to be a huge swath of things that you don't know or don't understand. And that's even true of us, having built our business now 8 years in mainland China, and I'm fully fluent in Mandarin, but it doesn't matter, right? It's fundamentally, it's not about language, it's fundamentally different. Those two things. You need to play with boots on the ground, and you need to stay super, super humble.
I will keep that in mind next time I'm trying to launch my China venture.
Okay.
I think the last question that we have here for you is, where do you see blockchain impacting China and perhaps, just global finance in general, maybe 5 years out, or, however far out you're willing to think about?
I think internationally, there's that whole graph. What is it, like the trough of disillusionment? I don't remember. I wasn't a consultant. I was a banker. I don't remember. But you know that graph where it cycles and there's overconfidence, et cetera, et cetera. The point is that internationally, my observation is that in terms of enterprise blockchain, we're in a trough. And so there's a lot of people that are discouraged and saying, well, we tried to use blockchain for like 99 different things already. And really, we're still waiting for, in terms of enterprise, to figure out what the heck the use case is. So it's my observation that we're kind of in that part of the cycle internationally. It's important to understand that that's not where we are in China. Actually, enterprise blockchain could not be hotter in China. So that's like totally different. And a lot of that comes from the fact that many aspects of China are top-down. And again, the Chinese government has made a decision that blockchain is one of the most strategic next-generation technologies in the world. And they view it in the same cluster as 5G, as AI, and technologies like that. To them, it could not be more important. And when the Chinese government decides that something could not be more important, there are numerous levers that they can pull and push to incentivize many aspects of the economy to follow their lead. As a result, couldn't be hotter, and you have a huge variety of companies, small, medium, and big, especially big though, that are trying to incorporate blockchain into many different aspects of their business. Ping-On, the insurance Goliath, is doing a number of different internal tests and pilots and things like that. So the first thing that I would say is you have to understand that the enterprise blockchain, they're not at all in the same part of that. The consultant makes that chart, you know what I'm talking about. They're not in the same part at all. The second thing is that you need to be careful to not, that's super exciting, but you got to look at it in context. And the best way to do that is to look at other industries that the Chinese government got super excited about previously. For example, solar was one, 4 or 5 years ago. And based on solar and other examples of this phenomenon, we can expect certain things. We can expect that there will be tremendous investment by many companies, especially large ones, but many types of companies in blockchain. Number two, we can expect that a lot of that will be overinvestment. In other words, it will be misallocation, and by misallocation, I mean that investing in projects that fundamentally don't make sense, right? And then second, it will be people trying to play different games to either take advantage of subsidies or curry favor with different levels of government officials, things like that. And then you'll have a lot of projects that fail. And then you will also have some things that turn out to be very, very successful and can compete certainly domestically and potentially even internationally. And this is we've seen this many times in various industries. I gave one example. I think most likely we will see the same phenomenon play out again in blockchain. I think you kind of have to frame it in that way, and then understand that we're talking about a frontier technology. So the error bar on everything is enormous. it's very difficult to even predict a month into the future, much less a year or even 5 years. Enormous error bars, but we can kind of start with the understanding of a few key things and then kind of try to project possible paths forward.
Great insights there. Definitely recommend thinking 1 month out rather than a couple months out in the crypto industry, especially.
Yeah. Actually, a month, maybe. I don't know. Go ahead.
No.
Is a month too long? I'm concerned a month is too long. Maybe we should do like a couple days.
Yeah, that's probably more accurate. But incredible insights on all the momentum going on in China, especially around the DCEP project. This is really, really fascinating conversation, and I'm sure our podcast listeners will get a good kick out of it. Is there anything else that we would like to, or you would like to chat about while we have you here, Matthew? This has been a wonderful conversation.
I have a whole team, as I mentioned. They're half foreign, half Chinese, et cetera, bilingual, many things, right? But I also have a business partner, so maybe I should have her pop on real quick and just give a shout out in Mandarin. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great.
Hello, 大家好，很高兴认识你们。
That was hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to meet you, is what she just said.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for the greetings. Hi from the US.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew,
very good.
for your time. This is a great podcast episode. If anyone has questions or would like to stay in touch with him, I highly recommend following him on Twitter at Matty Sino, MattySino. And thank you so much for your time. I look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thank you for listening to Hedera Hashgraph's Gossip About Gossip. If you liked the episode, please subscribe, rate and review, and also share and tell your friends.
Or connect with us on social media like Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Hashgraph, particularly if you want to leave us feedback on the podcast. We look forward to hearing from you.